Welcome everybody, and say this is a load management dialogue presented by PLMA, and here you'll discover practitioner perspectives on flexible energy load management, demand response, distributed energy resources, and managed charging. My name is Judy Knight. I'm PLMA's Chief Development Officer. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. And we are very excited today because we are kicking off our summer webinar series, which features all of the PLMA award winners from the 20th PLMA Awards, which were made in May of this year. And we are especially happy to welcome today Consumers Energy and Sagewell, who will be talking about the PowerMIDrive program in Michigan, its successes and lessons learned. And so I would like to welcome to the floor our awards co-chair, Kevin Knight. And Kevin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. As Judy mentioned, today we're having a conversation about a program that recently was awarded a Program Pacesetter Award. The Program Pacesetter Award acknowledges innovative solutions that require exceptional program design and delivery. The Program Pacesetter Award seeks to recognize outstanding programs, and the programs effectively support and deliver flexible load management, but can also be awarded to a utility, regulator, ISO, RTO, aggregator, or marketer. So it's wide open for anybody to apply for the Program Pacesetter Award. With that said, to present their work today, the Pacesetter Program Award winners from Consumers Energy, Jeff Myram and Gary Smith, president of Sagewell. So I went a little bit fast there, so I'll let us catch up. So for the Director of Transportation or Electric Transportation, Jeff, and Gary on the next slide is the president of Sagewell and has oversaw Sagewell's BYOC, AMI analytics, and electrification teams and programs. So as we proceed with today's presentation, we invite you to type any questions you may have into the chat, and I'll do my best to get them answered at the end. So we will have a Q&A at the end. So go ahead and type questions in as we go. I'll be collecting them and we can have that Q&A at the end. And with that, I'll welcome Jeff and Gary to take it away with their presentation today.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin, and to everyone from PLMA for recognizing the hard work that Consumers and Sagewell have done, and thanks to all of you for attending today. So this first graph that I want to show you really starts at the beginning of the PowerMIDrive program, right, when it launches in June 2019. And if you'll go to the next slide, I want us to think about what might have happened over the following 2 years. Right, is this the sort of growth we might expect? But if you go to the next slide, you'll see that something changed. There was a sudden sort of uptick and a large increase in enrollments. Right, we were at about 500 enrollments in the middle of 2021, and we're at just about 3,500 total enrollments now at the end of June 2023. So with that, just to give you all a teaser of kind of the exciting things that have happened over the last few years, I'll let Jeff go on to the next slide and tell you more about the program.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary, and glad to be part of PLMA and the award winner selected this year, and to be able to share the learnings and successes we've had with the programs and working with Sagewell as well today. So we have been just blowing the doors off where participation in the program would go. Beat our last year's target by over 30%. And our focus here is really to get people to charge super off-peak, which of course super off-peak is going to be different for every utility, but for us, it's those deep nighttime hours, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., and then all day on the weekends, which is totally fine and more than enough time, even if you don't charge all week, to get your car back in shape. And the participation through using AMI analysis and the combination of rebates and incentives that we've done with the program has been fantastic. I mean, 91% off-peak, super off-peak charging, and 98% off-peak. This is really just kind of completely exceeded our expectations. When we first started this pilot, actually, we were shooting for 70% or better on that, just kind of based on our own residential transformer analysis and where we wanted to be from a safety perspective, from reliability. So getting to this level is amazing. And of course, you compare that using AMI, which is the bring your own charger, to just networked charging stations, and it's a step up from that significantly. we were only about 62% off-peak charging or super off-peak charging using networked level 2s directly, and 92% off-peak overall. So what's great also about using AMI as opposed to a network charging is you can really do this with anybody who has a level 2 at home, doesn't matter the brand. Of course, we haven't implemented some safety standards with our program. We do require Energy Star and UL listed for that. And we also want to cap it out at 9.6 kilowatt based on what our local distribution system is designed for within most neighborhoods. So it's a 50 amp circuit, 40 amp continuous. And with those safeguards in place, anybody can participate, and that's really why we've seen an explosion of growth in addition to the marketing efforts. So next slide, please. All right. So we started this actually with a rate case back in 2018, but after your usual rate case debate, we got approval in 2019 and rapidly launched after that. And our goal was, or our initial thoughts were, let's implement a time use rate and let's utilize network charging stations in order to get this 70% or greater off-peak charging. And that was really where we started. So there is no active management, so to speak. I mean, some people might be curious about how did we signal the vehicles to start charging or stop charging. We're not doing that direct of control with the vehicles, any form of telematics on that side. It really is time of use rate and education to the customer being the focus. We did have the capability to do some demand response with the network chargers, but found we didn't need it compared to what we were getting for off-peak charging compared to the goals of the program. So never ended up pulling the trigger on that front. So I will say that as we got further into this program, we did realize some challenges with using networked EVSE or electric vehicle supply equipment. And the primary challenges were these disconnected as opposed to AMI, which don't. So we were seeing close to sometimes 20% of those network level 2s disconnecting. And the homeowners weren't always aware, frankly, that they even were connecting. So then you're circling back with them. You've got all that follow-up administration. Ended up being a lot of work. And so that led us to the thought process of how do we take this to the next level? How do we get more people involved? And how do we ensure that we have really good reliability with getting the data and getting compliance and participation in the program? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we started out slow, but this really shows the journey of why AMI is important, because there's a definite gear change here. That first almost year and a half, only 580 people knocked on our door and said they want to participate in the program. We really ramped up our marketing efforts. I mean, significantly. We got 1,500 in the next 14 months. However, what's not shown on this slide is our cost per acquisition, and it was not in a good shape as far as participation. And so I don't know what the size of all your utility service areas are, but we have about 1.7 million residential meters growing all the time, and we serve about 6 million people out of Michigan's nearly 10 million people within that network. So when we're talking about pulling in, today, or at this time, we probably had about 10,000 EV drivers total in the area. You're really aiming at a needle in a haystack. And so again, you can spend a lot of money on marketing. You can do propensity models. You can figure out who's the techies and the environmentalists and most interested in this program, but it's not surgically going to get you to where you want to go. And so once we implemented AMI, we saw the program, frankly, almost tie the last year and a half within just the first 9 months of launch. And we are well above that now. So 1,200 people in a short amount of time. So unlocking that participation, really critical for program success, because if they're not getting involved in your programs, they're probably not even engaging in time use rates. And we'll get into that in a little bit of Gary's data later, but critically important on how to identify and get these folks in. And we're proud to say we're over 3,400 now and setting enrollment records almost every week for the program. Next slide, please. Back to you, Gary.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So the big change and what caused that step increase really between in August 2021 was the addition, as Jeff mentioned, of using that AMI data. And the key was initially opening it up to any home charger, right? the classic of Tesla drivers wanting to use Tesla branded chargers, or using a 240 volt outlet and a plug-in cable, right? Not wanting to buy the networked devices, or unable to use other technologies. So by enabling those drivers who are a large percent of the total vehicles and an even larger percentage of the total load, that really enabled the program to grow really quickly from that point. And so not only does the BYOC portion of PowerMIDrive use the AMI data for monitoring those enrolled drivers, we also use it to target and identify other drivers in the network, and basically send them direct mail or emails or other sort of targeted outreach efforts in order to get them to enroll. So if you go to the next slide, please. And if you look at this graph is going to show essentially the percent of new enrollments by quarter. So obviously for the first several quarters, the charger rebate is the only show in town. So we see 100% of people enrolling in that offering. But when the BYOC portion of the program launched in Q3 of 2021, we see that new enrollments automatically jumped to about 50%. And then since then, it's been around 60% throughout the whole time. So that means that more than half of all drivers either already have a charger at their home and don't need a rebate on one of the network chargers, or for some other reason like this AMI-based approach better and find it to be an easier option for them. So that kind of sort of customer choice, right? Because customers can freely choose which program they'll enroll in, really shows us the sort of low barriers and kind of the power of that AMI-based approach. Next slide, please. And just to let you all kind of know how BYOC works, particularly consumers, but we operate this at other utilities as well. Essentially, it's a passive load shifting program. And the main technology that we leverage is actually the scheduling software in every EV, right? You can tap on your dashboard or get on your app, that comes with your car, and schedule your car to charge at whatever time your utility would like, or whatever time that you would like. So that technology is in every vehicle. It's universal. You don't have to download extra apps or use any particular kind of hardware. So being able to use that one-time scheduling functionality, we're able to reach drivers and really only bother them during the enrollment process. So they set their schedule once, then they forget about it. They come home and they plug their car in whenever they'd like, and it waits to charge until the right time every night. And when they want to leave in the morning, they have a full charge. And really, that's what the customer experience that matters, right? Most customers don't care about the grid. They don't care about helping the system overall. They want to know that their car is charged at the right time when they need it, and giving them a little bit of money for it makes it all the easier. So once the customer is enrolled, we use the AMI data to basically identify when those vehicles are charging and ensure that they're charging at the times that they're supposed to. And if they charge more than a certain number of times during the on-peak period, then they may lose their incentive for that month. And then we do have basically a flat incentive for that off-peak charging. So it's not based on kilowatt hours, it's based on whether or not you're following the program rules. So with that, you can go ahead and jump to the next slide, please. And so this slide is showing kind of the distribution of where throughout the state drivers are enrolling. I believe the red dots or the orange dots are the charger rebate enrollees, and the blue dots are the BYOC folks. But the key to the program's success is not just enrolling any EV that shows up, because then we might just get a bunch of people that charge once a month at 3 kW, and it's not really a huge value to the system. So part of our marketing efforts is not only identifying meters that have level 2 charging at them, it's trying to identify those that charge during peak times the most often or charge at the highest rate, and really encouraging outreach to those customers specifically. And so we see in the BYOC portion of the program, about 50% of all drivers are identified from the AMI data before they join. So that's 50% that may not have found the program otherwise, but we directly targeted them and got them from there. There isn't an equivalent stat for the charger rebate side, obviously, because if we're identifying level 2 charging, those people don't have that data before they receive the charging rebate. So it's kind of a one-sided stat, but that's just the nature of how it goes. So next slide, please. Back to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Gary. So as part of those outreach efforts, this is kind of some important context is AMI helped us really get the existing customers or the existing EV drivers who are out there, but now we're really shifting our focus to the rapid growth that we're seeing in the electric vehicle market. And so how this works is really a 1-2 punch. It's a $500 rebate to get you in the door, to get you excited about the program, and then the AMI and the incentive then really cements that behavior. And so to get that message out, we've been really actively involved, of course, with direct emails and physical mailers this year. And the way we use that AMI data and EV Finder analysis that we get from Gary and Sagewell is not in a big brother type manner at all. We really just send a postcard or an email that says, hey, are you aware we have an EV program? Or maybe you're interested in driving an electric vehicle. We are not in any way saying we know 100% certain that you have an EV in your garage. So that's an important aspect of how to reach out to the customer and not make them nervous about smart meter analysis. We also have found that we need to be really active with online social media, particularly if there's Facebook groups or other membership groups like that in your state that are EV driving enthusiasts. This is a really excellent way to get the word out. And then once a couple of them start participating in something like the smart charging incentive, they will rapidly help you spread the word as well. Because the most likely person to drive an EV is frankly the person whose friend or neighbor drives an EV currently. Every single one of my neighbors down the street has driven my car. And that is just the way it goes. So make sure you get out there, engaging in those clubs and those auto shows as well, because auto shows are places where people don't want that high sales pitch, type environment, potentially like a dealership, but they will go to an auto show where they can look around at multiple vehicles. And if you're there handing out information as well and saying, hey, we have this charging reward system and a time of use rate that will save you money, you will get their attention. And of course, butts and seats is really great with ride and drives and just kind of EV 101, given that at least in Michigan, 98 out of 100 people don't currently own an EV. So most people are starting from ground zero. Really important to do. We're finally seeing some growth in dealerships getting interested. A couple of years ago, they were not that interested in participating with us, but now with where all the OEMs are moving to and their sales goals, they're really coming to us and wanting us to do those one-on-one presentations for their sales staff as well. And of course, their sales staff is excited about our $500 rebate and our up to $120 in monthly incentives, because that's important for their customers to know. And then finally, I would really encourage you to think about EV experts on your team, somebody that people can call directly and ask questions or email and ask questions to. I would not recommend you do this through your call center because average speed of answer is going to blow your metrics out of the water. I mean, a lot of people will take 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer, of investigating which vehicle they want and what kind of charger they want to put in their home before they actually either have that vehicle arrive or that they place their order. So an important tip there as well. Next slide, please. Back to you, Gary.
Excellent. And since this is the Peak Load Management Alliance, we want to make sure to talk about the load. So this first graph is showing the weekday EV charging of non-participants. And this isn't showing kilowatts or kilowatt hours. It's actually showing the percent of charging hours. That's a good way to kind of normalize it across different vehicle types and all of that to give us basically a sense of what that charging behavior looks like. So for example, just to call it out specifically, at midnight, these non-enrolled customers that are also not on a time of use rate do about 5% of their charging at that midnight time. And you can see the peak of that charging typically is in the sort of 8 to 9 o'clock time period, right? People are coming home at various points. Most of them are charging for multiple hours. So that's when the overlap starts to build up. And then it starts to taper off as those charging sessions finish. Next slide, please. So here's a comparison. That same blue line is the non-participants, those not on a time of use rate, those not participating with the BYOC program. And then we've added a red line, which shows essentially the light time of use rate. So Consumers Energy has a couple of different rates. Those that are already on the light time of use rate don't have to switch to a different rate. So we kind of pull those out separately for analysis. Those that are already on the nighttime savers rate or on the standard rate will get moved to the nighttime savers rate. So that's more of a full time of use rate. So you'll see that while the red line people look like they're quote unquote doing worse, they're actually following the rules of their rate pretty well. But there is a long-term sort of goal to shift more people away from that time period, given just changes in usage and solar drop off and all these sort of other factors that are coming down. So more and more of these drivers are being shifted to the full time of use rate, the nighttime savers rate. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this next graph is showing what the BYOC customers are, right? How they charge. And this is a snapshot of a particular month, I believe earlier this year. And you can see that there's almost no charging during the week, during the daytime hours. There's a large increase at midnight, but then it really continues with some staying power through about 5 a.m. And some of that comes from natural differences in when people set their charging schedule, right? Some people want a departure time, some people want a start charging at time. And then we also just find some random assortment of people just pick a time between the two. They want to start at 2 a.m. There's no incentive for them to do so, but that's just kind of what they've chosen. So we see a little bit of a natural spread between the different enrollees in the program. All right, and then if you can go to the next slide. And then this is a comparison of the customers in blue have received the EVSE rebate and are on the nighttime savers sort of full time of use rate. And the line in red is those people on the BYOC program. So you can see while overall the load is still pretty similar, right? We're not seeing much charging during the day, but with the EVSE rebate, we see that there is starting to be an increasing amount in those sort of late afternoon, evening hours. And as that earlier slide showed, that's a time of increasing interest or concern in the future. So trying to shift more of that load away from that time period is going to be valuable going forward. But overall, I would say that both of these approaches do work. BYOC does work a little bit better. And then it's questions of how many cars can you enroll, what's the cost of these different incentives, and those sort of other questions. And those will depend. Different utilities will have different outcomes, but we find that using this AMI data has been particularly helpful and useful for shifting that load. Next slide, please. All right, back to you, Jeff.
All right, thanks, Gary. So again, the permanent program just launched, and we did have some technical standards that we kind of polished up the program with. In particular, many people were asking, what do I tell my electrician? What do I talk about putting in my garage? People just really didn't have that baseline. And so our homes in Michigan, were most of the lower peninsula of Michigan, in the summer, peak summer, maybe a little over 10 kilowatt. And so we knew that if we were very successful in shifting this to the super off peak when everybody has most of their stuff off, that we could handle that type of load within the neighborhoods. Hence the 50 amp, 40 amp continuous, 9.6 kilowatt maximum on there. And of course, the safety certifications to ensure people weren't buying the cheapest thing on Amazon, to be frank, and potentially having fires or shorts in their garage. Very dangerous situation on that front. So another important reason to have outreach for customers. We also are going from an either or situation to both. Again, if you're putting in a home level 2, that might be about $1,000 cost and just the wiring alone. If you need a panel upgrade because you don't have sufficient service, now you might be up to $2,000 or $3,000 on that. So there can be a real barrier to entry economically on getting that level 2 in your house. So that $500 rebate really acts as the hook. It gets people engaged. They're willing to call you. And when we did some kind of Google search analysis on were people thinking of the utility as one of the top things to think about when getting an electric vehicle, it's embarrassingly low. So I really encourage this as a way to get people interested in your program, the 1-2 punch. Again, that time of use rate, the education, the incentive is behavior reinforcement. And we've got all 4 seasons in Michigan. We wanted to make sure that people, both from a time duration and from a weather perspective, were comfortable realizing that if you started charging at 11 p.m. or after, or even focused your charging on the weekends, that you would be just fine. You would be in great shape. And of course, a new EV driver or buyer is very concerned about range. They're very concerned about this, is their battery going to last them for their typical driving? That's over 200 miles a night, and a lot more on the weekend. And so once they get that down, they tend not to change the programming in the vehicle. I saw that was a question on the side, and they stick with it. Plus, there's the cost savings. And we can, through our EV specialists, some of whom are doing a nice job answering questions in the chat, we can show them through an analysis that our time of use rate is great for saving money. And we can even do that before they buy an EV. And if you're already doing your laundry or a lot of cooking or something on the weekends, you're probably already saving money anyway. So we have not actually found any customer who did not save money by going with our nighttime savers rate, which is our most extreme time of use rate. And people are nervous about it. And I'll share this one more stat. We only had about 0.5% of customers who own an EV on their own go out and find nighttime savers. Again, that's our preferred EV rate with that 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. time period on their own. 0.5%. That's it. So people are nervous about time use rates, and they're certainly not reading our rate books, as exciting as they are. So really important to do that AMI analysis. Next slide, please.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Jeff. The good news is the easy part's out of the way, but now we have a bunch of questions, so you guys are going to be put on the spot. So there were some questions entered before the presentation, so I'll go through those, and then I will try to pick out the questions that were not answered in the chat. But first question for you all, does the data that you are getting from the AMI meters, does that require a specific meter for the EV charger, or do you just use the whole home meter in that case?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we use the whole home data. We have a whole suite of algorithms and other sort of machine learning models and all of that identify EV charging from that whole home data. So yeah, whole home is fine. If a utility has separate meters, we can certainly use that data as well, but it's not necessary for the program.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the other thing I would say about the analysis is, even if you get a false positive, I wouldn't worry about it, because that person has a ramp profile in their load, or maybe a usage profile that they would benefit from a time of use rate. And so I don't see it as wasted money in any regard, because maybe you do have some other form of technology, an arc welder that you're working on your car in the weekend or whatever. Great, please, get on a time of use rate. It still helps us.
All right, thank you. The second question for you all, have you considered telematics data for your EV charge management program?
Yes, we have, and we might dive further into that in the future, but right now, I guess I would describe it as very much in the emerging phase. There are some companies that can do potentially multiple brands with vehicles, but I don't think anybody has the full picture yet. And so it really depends on the vehicle mix in your state. But do I think we'll get there by 2030? Yes, I think we'll be moving more into telematics by that time. But for the next couple of years at least, I expect AMI and time of use rate to continue to be incredibly successful.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off on that, one of the key benefits that we've talked about a few times about this style analysis is that it opens the program up to any level 2 charging EV, right? So at the moment, there are a number of makes and models that you can't access via telematics, or there's a cost to the customer or something like that. So telematics, I think, is definitely the sort of exciting future. But if we need to shift a lot of load today, then AMI is actually going to reach more cars and be able to shift more of that load. So that's kind of the framework that we're working with here.
All right. Next question coming in from the chat. How are the BYOC enrollees found through AMI data? Are there any algorithms or anything that you all are using?
Yeah. So we have a whole suite of algorithms. We have particular ones that we just call EV Finder. So they go through looking at every residential meter for every hour of the month or the year or whatever time period, and basically flagging them as different levels of probability of having an EV. And depending on the purpose, we can basically take the ones we're most confident about, or maybe a slightly larger group for doing marketing. Machine learning and artificial intelligence and all those sorts of buzzwords are certainly part of the process. And it definitely happens at scale, right? So we analyze millions of meters basically every day to try and find new cars as a part of all of our programs. So.
All right. The next question from the chat: what is the rationale for requiring whole house TOU, given that you're just measuring EV charging use?
Yeah, I can address that a little bit. So if you do a second meter, there are additional costs. Our Public Service Commission was not, at least in our case, they have done it for other utilities within Michigan, was not interested in a separate meter approach. They really wanted to both get the EV load off peak, in addition to encourage people to use more devices off peak in general. So it's both a cost savings and a little bit broader application of where it was. Again, you could use a separate meter, but then you're rolling trucks and crews to get that done, additional infrastructure to make it happen. And, when you think about a level 2, most of those are going to be 7 kilowatts and up. There's very few other things in the home that are going to trigger that type of ramp in the load. And so it's pretty easy. I wouldn't say it's pretty easy. Gary's got a lot of math behind him and a PhD, I believe. But it's more easy through machine learning to find 7+ kilowatt spikes than it is, for example, like level 1, which might be closer to 1.5 kilowatt, just kind of buried within the noise that's out there. And we're not really, if you can live on a level 1 and you're fine, and we see about 20% of our EV drivers on those level 1s continuously, no big deal. That's not a concern for us from a utility perspective.
Yeah, and one more comment about that is that consumers are actually unique among our clients in that some of them actually require you not to be on a time of use rate in order to be on BYOC. So from our point of view, we can actually do regular residential rate plus BYOC, or time of use rate plus BYOC, or any sort of combination thereof. So in this particular case, the commission said, do this, and we all said, yes, we will.
All right, thanks. Next question from the chat. Why did you all decide on a flat incentive as opposed to a variable incentive that could be potentially a lower rate?
Frankly, some customer testing. So we found there was a breakpoint in customer behavior across a variety of programs with about a $10 a month incentive. Less than that was not particularly exciting to folks, and more than that didn't appear to bring that many more people in. So that's our customer survey data. I mean, you may be different based on your cost of living, but that's where ours has landed, and it's worked incredibly well. The other thing we've done with the $10 a month is translate it to like a real world meeting. So if you go through all 12 months and get $120, that's over 2,000 free miles of driving. And a lot of people are making the switch to EVs. They're concerned about fuel prices, and free miles, you gotta love that. So it's been a good way to translate that for customers as well.
Yeah, and one more comment about that is that when we think about volumetric incentives, right? If we say 1 cent off per kilowatt hour that you use off peak, that's actually incentivizing those that drive more, not necessarily incentivizing those that charge on peak, right? So if we think about the value of shifting that 7 kW on peak to off peak, maybe that works out to be about $10. And it doesn't, if someone drives 1,000 miles a year and still charges every day, at that same time, they're actually just as valuable as someone who drives tens of thousands of miles but never charges during that peak time. And also providing a per kilowatt hour incentive opens us up for a little bit more abuse, right? We've seen lots of cases where people find ways to use electricity in the unintended ways on sort of volumetric based incentive programs.
All right, great. So the next question that came in is really leaning into all the success that you guys have mentioned during this presentation. And the question is curious about, with the success of BYOC, are you all considering ending the rebate charger or the charger rebate program? And the second part of that question, so are you considering ending the rebate program for chargers? And then the second question would be, what size are you seeing through the BYOC versus the charger rebate program? Are they equivalent, or is there any differentiation that is worth mentioning between the two?
Yeah, I'll start. We're definitely not looking at ending the $500 rebate. That we're seeing as a really important part of people getting in the door. People actively wanting to engage with their utility. Again, if you've ever done rates and you've tried to sell like a summertime of use rate, tends to be incredibly unpopular with the public. People like their freedom of when they can use their device when. So you have to really position it in a positive carrot type format to get the behavior that you desire. So not looking at this time to end that. I mean, once we get into the 2030s and the vast majority of society has EVs, okay, like I think there will be a phase out period, but I really don't see that within the next 5 years for sure, probably even 7 years to be frank. And then remind me again of the second part of the question there, please.
The second part was just looking at the size of the chargers. Are there any differences between what is BYOC versus the incentive program?
Yes, there is a small difference. I mean, most customers right now are coming in with the rebate and then following up with bring your own charger, the BYOC program. However, there are some customers who might have put in or want to put in higher than a 9.6 kilowatt level 2, in which case you don't qualify for the rebate. We're not going to incentivize you putting in a 19.2 kilowatt charger, for example, in your home. That is a lot of upgrades, and you'll also be responsible for the transformer upgrade as well. But there are some wealthy customers who they don't bat an eye at that, and they're willing to put in the higher power charger, or they may already have it installed, and we would still like to change their behavior. We would much rather have a 19.2 kilowatt in the deep hours of the night as opposed to peaking about this time here in July.
So it really seemed like you wanted a third part to that question. So just a third related question that came in is, how did you figure out the rebates were not as effective for enrollment as the TOU and the rates that you were providing?
Data, and more data. So every customer that contacted us, the EV specialist attempted to get the size and brand of the charger that they were using, as well as the vehicle that they were driving. And that's how, in the early part of the program, we figured out that about 20% of people were on a level 1, not really a risk. They were still calling in, didn't even have a level 2. Maybe we're exploring getting a level 2. But we had a fairly high number of unnetworked chargers that were coming in through customers that were calling us, and also a fairly large number of Tesla owners. And again, those are unnetworked level 2s who were calling us. So when you added up all those percentages of level 1, non-networked, and the Teslas, out of the gate, I want to say we were close to 2/3 of people contacting us that were not eligible for the program. That's a major problem if you're trying to get load shifting.
And Gary, I may have cut you off earlier. Was there anything that
Yeah, I was going to jump back to the question about the size difference, or the kW draw difference between BYOC and other customers. This is a data point from another utility where they had a separately metered rate and an incentive, and then also BYOC as an option. And those customers that enrolled on the separately metered rate had about 1/3 the kW. So, typically like a 3 or 4 kW charger versus those that enrolled by BYOC who had, something like a 9 or a 10 kW draw. So that isn't necessarily going to work across all utilities, right? Every utility has their own unique mix of customers and programs. But for that particular utility, we saw a huge difference. I think it's definitely less here at the consumer's territory.
Great. The next question from the chat is asking about the differentiation between off-peak and super off-peak. Do you differentiate incentives between the two? And if not, why have both?
We don't differentiate incentives between the two. It's most important not to charge on peak. I get a little more philosophical, futuristic on kind of where we're going with the program is we will be leaning more into workplace in the future. We expect, and Gary showed it on one of the slides, that 4 p.m. to maybe 9 p.m. time period is where we really want to keep people out of in the long run. So where telematics could come in and where we may end up shifting those shoulders and actually incentivizing some during the day is as we get more solar, we're likely going to be encouraging people to charge more at workplaces and away from home to even further spread out that load.
And the BYOC incentive time period matches the nighttime savers rate. So the lowest electricity rate also mirrors the time you need to charge for that program. But as I mentioned earlier, you can be on the sort of light time of use rate and participate in BYOC. It's just that your TOU rate periods and your BYOC periods are going to be a little bit different, but we haven't noticed any major difference in participation levels or effectiveness at that sort of difference.
All right, so the next question is going to change the pace a little bit and have you guys look out into the future. So we'll probably end up back to where we were, but as a brief break for you all, with electrification efforts, and we have heat pump water heaters and HVAC heat pumps coming into the market more and more, do you all foresee challenges with the AMI data analytics that you have and the M&B of detecting these EVs moving forward? So with larger loads, electrification, how do you see those impacts to how you are currently implementing the program?
Yeah, so that's actually something that we're really excited about. So our Sagewell as an organization is interested in all parts of electrification, and we do AMI analytics around all of it. BYOC and the EV related items are sort of top of everyone's mind, but we're constantly looking at ways to improve our models and outcomes based on these different loads. And we see really different loads in different parts of the country, right? So we have a program in Jacksonville, Florida, where they have a completely different load profile than people up in Michigan, right? So it's all about knowing what to expect in that territory and having ways to basically pull out those other uses. There's always going to be gray areas, and that's another reason that we've designed the program with a flat incentive, because there's always going to be a little bit of an uncertainty about any of this identification. Saying when an EV is charging or not charging is a lot easier than saying there was 13 kilowatt hours used at this time period, that sort of thing. And as more of these other electrified end uses comes on, I think the identification of this vehicle was charging is going to get harder. Certainly not going to become impossible, but the disaggregating individual kilowatt hour levels is going to get much more complicated.
Yeah, I would agree with Gary. I think EVs are the start of AMI analysis. I think this is going to delve us into other technologies and load management on those sides as well, especially as we move our AMI data to a more of an incremental basis, moving down from hourly to 15-minute, potentially in the future, maybe even 5-minute increments. That's going to just unlock a host of other customer programs.
All right, thanks. Next question. You've made it about 20 minutes without getting a cost effectiveness or CBA question, cost benefit analysis. Someone's asking, with the $120 EV per year cost before acquisition, are you recouping the full cost of the program, or do you subsidize it through the rate base?
Yeah, so we are recouping the full cost of the program, but we're doing it in, I think, a creative way that makes a lot of sense. And all of this is in our rate cases, and it's been proven out through at least 3 or 4 rate cases now. But the program pays for itself. So essentially what we told our commission, we demonstrated to our commission, is even very low case growth scenarios, which we're exceeding, that load growth is creating additional revenue. And we're proposing to take a portion of that revenue and use it for our electric vehicle programs. Hence why being able to surgically target customers is incredibly important. You don't want to be throwing money out the door, just trying to find that needle in a haystack, especially here in the early part of the market. But then the way that we recover it is through a regulatory asset mechanism. So we take this year's spend and we spread that over the next 5 years with our rate of return. So it is treated as a capital asset. Now, the reason why we were able to, so that does a couple things. Yes, we have spend this year, but because we're spreading it out over the next 5 years, and you can imagine that's kind of stacking up as time goes, and that cuts off once we've fully recovered after 5 years, that keeps recovery in line with load growth. And so that's been a very effective argument with our demonstration with our commission and our interveners in our cases. But the other thing that I would say is, and the reason why I think I would argue and why we were successful at getting a return on that, is if we did nothing, we actually would probably have a greater incentive as a utility, because we would be building more peak resources. We would be rebuilding neighborhood distribution systems. There would be a lot of capital expenditures that would happen as this goes on. However, that would raise rates for everybody. And that is not at all where we want to go with electric vehicles. By getting that load into the super off-peak, we're getting more kilowatt hours through the exact same infrastructure. So not only are we able to tell and demonstrate to our commission that our recovery and our load growth is paying for all these programs, more so, we are actually going to be reducing rates or creating downward rate pressure for our customers through the success of this program. Our latest NPV out to 2030 is around 150 million in downward rate pressure, using this kind of mechanism and model for where to go. So that's been very successful. We're in a current rate case right now for a permanent fleet and public infrastructure program where we're focusing level 2s at places like hotels, overnight locations, just to replicate the exact behavior you'd have at home, and also to diminish kind of pressure on the developing DCFC network, which is out there. And all of these programs put together are still showing that they're paying for themselves with our off-peak success and the load growth that we're seeing.
Sticking with the theme of cost, in your research, are you able to provide a typical installation cost of the charger compared to the rebate that these customers are receiving?
Yes, we do. We do collect data. We do ask customers to share their installation costs with us. Historically, we've seen in the ballpark of around $1,000 for basically putting in a new fuse and running a circuit out to your garage. That can vary quite a bit. Probably the lowest we've seen is around $300. If people aren't putting their panel in their garage with new homes, I would highly recommend they do that because the shorter run, the better. If your panel is on the opposite side of your home from your garage and you have a finished basement or you need a panel upgrade, now we're seeing $2,000 to $3,000 for total installation costs. That's separate from the level 2. That's just the electrician work behind the meter inside your home, all those costs that I just mentioned. So the $500 rebate is for the installation. Again, that's to ensure that we get the right NEMA 1450 and a good quality, meeting all the code installed circuit in that customer's home. The rebate technically doesn't cover the level 2. However, again, that's why you want safety standards, because if you don't tell people you have to be Energy Star, UL, or equivalent listed to get that rebate, they may go out and buy the absolute cheapest level 2. And even though the circuit's good, the electric hardware might be questionable from a safety perspective. So definitely important to get all those details right in your program.
That is a good segue to the last two questions are going to be customer centric. And the first customer centric question is, can customers apply or enroll into this program before they have the EV? Can you take advantage of the excitement of the EV purchase, or do they have to have the car in their driveway before they can apply?
So as long as you can prove that you have an order or a reservation for an electric vehicle, we do allow you to go ahead and use our electrician network to get that installed and to get the $500 rebate. But as soon as the car shows up, that is when you'll start qualifying for the $10 a month on that front. And that's important to do, I think, from a couple perspectives. One, at least up until this year, maybe it's getting better. It's been very hard to go down anywhere and just get a vehicle at the local dealership. It's still impossible in a lot of places, or you have a significant drive to do so, at least in Michigan. Of course, Tesla's a little different experience with the online ordering. So allowing people to get that in place before the vehicle shows up is important for helping them feel secure that they know they have the right charging infrastructure when the vehicle arrives and they're not waiting. And also because we've had such a bad backlog with just kind of trade work in general after the pandemic that we're still catching up on. You don't want to be getting your vehicle and then getting in line with the electrician to make that happen. You might be, of course, through our program, we typically get those installs done through in about 2 weeks or less. But we have certainly heard of people having to wait several months to get an electrician in their home otherwise. And to give a little more detail on that, we do contract with electricians across our service territory that we know have experience with EVSE installation and the NEMA 1450. continuous load for an EV. They cover the entire state. These are third parties. We're not getting kickbacks from them or giving them kickbacks. We're just ensuring that if we give you this list of electricians, that we know they are well certified to make this happen and do a safe installation for you.
All right, so I think this is the last question. It's on the customer-centric side. You mentioned EV specialists that you have that work with the customers. Can you just give us an idea of what questions they can help customers ask or answer, and what questions customers are asking them? Any insight into the most popular interactions your team has?
It is a wide variety of questions, I'll say that. If you're going to have EV specialists, I would highly recommend you have active EV drivers in that role, so they're living the life and fully understand that experience. Most people are very curious about, will a time of use rate actually save me money? And can you show me the proof? That's a big question. Another one is, what do I install in my garage? Taking away the stress of what to communicate to your electrician with an EMA 1450 is incredibly important. That may sound very basic to us, but to the typical person who does not do this work, it's a mystery, and it's not easy for them to figure out. So that's an important question. We will get vehicle specific questions. If you're buying a Mach-E, for example, and that's why a lot of us try to communicate among each other and go to these car events as well, because we want to learn from people who have a vehicle that maybe we don't drive, get some tips on that side. And then we refer them to also a wide variety, I'd say, like YouTube channels with great resources, or to come out to some of these EV 101 and ride and drive events so they can experience the vehicles themselves. So we will also share the event information with them on that front.
Awesome. Well, with that, I want to thank you both, Jeff and Gary, for the presentation, and special shout out and thank you to Carson and Brittany in the chat answering questions. They super helpful and answered a lot of questions there. With that, I will pass it back to Judy to close out the presentation.
Thank you, Kevin. And again, a big thank you to Jeff and Gary, and also, of course, Brittany and Carson. What a great presentation, and what a wonderful sort of information, ideas, thoughts. You guys have done so much hard work on this, and obviously it's been very successful. So thank you very much for presenting for us today. I did want to let everybody know in the audience that if you would like to go back and listen to this presentation, it will be available on PLMA's podcast channel, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And we also do have a YouTube channel where we will be posting the recording of this, the webinar recording, in probably 2 or 3 days from now. So you can look at it there. And then going forward to our next event, next slide, please. Yes. For everybody who is excited about EVs, which I think is everybody in this audience, we wanted to let you know that we will have another load management dialogue webinar coming up on Tuesday, August the 1st. And this one will be with our friends from NREL, who will be talking about some research that they've been doing around charging network requirements to meet transportation electrification goals. It will be hosted by PLMA's Electric Transportation Interest Group. And so it will be a really interesting, compelling discussion as well. You can register on PLMA's calendar. Next slide, please. And last of all, of course, not least, I want to call your attention to PLMA's EV Symposium on Managed Charging, which is coming up in the very near future, about 2.5 to 3 weeks from now, in Detroit, Michigan. And we have all kinds of interesting speakers. We have folks who are EV program managers from utilities joining us. We have people who are from the automotive OEMs joining us, and of course, PLMA members. And so we are really excited to hear what everybody has to say about managed charging, what we've learned, and what the future is going to look like. So I encourage you to invite colleagues, especially folks that are utility EV professionals, and we will have a rich set of conversations in Detroit. We hope you'll join us. Again, you can register on the PLMA calendar. And then last slide is you have been listening to a load management dialogue presented by PLMA. To learn more about upcoming dialogues and for an archive of past recordings, please visit us at peakload.org or your favorite podcast platform. And this concludes this edition. Thanks, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.